Welcome back to the show. Of course, it is St. Patrick's Day, and for some people, unfortunately, a day that should have some religious significance, some family significance, turns into a big old party.
That's right, and some people do overindulge in the alcohol from time to time. Dr. Daniel Kalla, of course, you know him as an author as well as an ER physician. He's here to talk about overindulging in alcohol and all sorts of other things that he sees in the emergency ward. How are you?
Good, good. We were talking about which holidays are sort of the busiest for you in the ER, and St. Patrick's Day, not even a blip, does it?
Oh yeah, it's probably a blip, but because because you know it often comes midweek and stuff. It's not as bad. New Year's Eve
is the worst.
It's the big one.
And you were telling us something quite fascinating, because I remember the first time that I ever drank, and it went quite poorly, and ended up in a visit to the ER between my parents, which wasn't good. But what happens to kids when they, the underage and people that haven't really had this experience before?
Well, Fiona and I are just talking about what constitutes alcohol poisoning, and it really is different for every person in terms of the alcohol level you have to reach. But a lot of kids, it's first time heavy drinking, their blood alcohols shoot up to levels that some of us might be able to cope at, but they literally become comatose. They lose consciousness. And this is how sometimes we see these kids throwing up and in mild to moderate comas.
Which can be quite dangerous, because when you're not conscious and you're throwing up, of course you could choke.
It's dangerous, exactly. And that's one of the big risks that we always tell people, turn people on their side.
But what do they wake up
now,
at
they
6 o'clock
don't pump stomachs anymore.
No,
that's witch doctory.
So what happens when one does end up, you drink that much that you end up in the emergency ward? What happens?
Well, what happens, we protect their airway, like you say, we start intravenous fluids, but we also, because there's a tendency to pee yourself, when you're unconscious and full of fluids.
Best case scenario.
Yeah.
So they wake up in a diaper.
A lot of them wake up in diapers, which is like a thing. It's like a rite of passage, and it's an awful thing when you're a 17-year-old who went out to a dance, and you wake up the next morning.
It should teach one a lesson about drinking, but as humans, we never seem to quite learn
it. Does. Well, let's hope these people just don't go.
Another thing that we wanted to talk about today are prescription drugs. Of course, we keep on hearing about deaths by prescription drugs all the time, and it seems to be the go-to thing for people when they're partying. What kind of drugs are people abusing when it comes to prescription drugs?
Well, I mean, all kinds. It's a huge spectrum. But what they call the psychotropic drugs, which are drugs that have that effect of giving you euphoria, or this up feeling, or even down feeling in the case of certain sedatives. But the big ones are the narcotics. So any kind of painkillers that have narcotic property, like oxycodone, codeine, hydromorphone, all those are commonly abused. And the sedatives, like Valium, the benzodiazepines.
And what is the markup, the street value of these with people?
It's amazing. I just discovered this myself, because a lot of people recycle these drugs. They sell them, they get prescriptions and sell them on the street, either for money or to buy other hard drugs like heroin or whatever. And apparently the markup is phenomenal. Like the hydromorphone, which is a common pill we use for pain, it's also known as Dilaudid. A pill that in a pharmacy would sell for 32 cents will sell for $32 on the street.
Whoa!
So I mean, it's enticing.
That's a big markup.
It's a big markup.
What do these things do in terms of addiction and things like that? What sort of level of addiction can they have?
Well, they're highly addictive. They're as addictive as heroin, because they're the same. I mean, basically all narcotics come down to the same compound, and they have the same effect on the brain. Right? So
is that opiates?
Yeah, exactly. Opiates, narcotics, the same thing. But there's certain receptors that these stimulate. It doesn't matter how you take it, whether it's heroin, methadone,
or prescription
pills. It's the same
oftentimes people don't realize the danger of the addictive properties of this, but also mixing it with alcohol, which is what a lot of people do, because they just start experimenting with it.
Because one isn't enough.
Oh, thank God these things just make me fall asleep. But people end up in the hospital, of course, with overdoses and such.
Absolutely, and die. I mean, we saw, Michael Jackson wasn't heroin, but with Heath Ledger, we saw it with Elvis, we saw it with Corey Haim, we see it with these celebrities. Because the problem is a lot of these people get on these drugs legitimately. It's often the doctor's fault. They have car accidents, they have injuries, they have pain. The problem is they're kept on it too long, and they form this dependence on the drug. And then if you're a celebrity, it's pretty easy to get your hands on more drugs, and there's people, feeding it to you, and it becomes this vicious cycle.
And I would imagine that the long-term consequences on the human body are not positive. How long, does it take to do significant damage? I mean, you get a prescription from a doctor when you have something physically wrong with you, and I'm assuming that stops point before it's going to cause any issues.
Yeah, well,
or should.
Should. We're doing a piss poor job if it doesn't. But you know, it really depends on the drug. The things like narcotics really aren't that damaging for long term in terms of their physical effect. It's the addictive effect and the lifestyle that it leads you to. But other drugs, you know, examples like kids who, you know, a lot of people sort of abuse amphetamines and crystal meth
what's
is made.
that?
Amphetamines are uppers, you know, they're these drugs that the sympathomimetic system is stimulated, so it's that fight or flight reaction where it gets you all agitated. It also gives this kind of euphoric feeling. So crystal meth, ecstasy are two examples. But the derivative for crystal meth is Sudafed or ephedrine, the stuff you find in cough syrup. And that's how a lot of
allergy medication has it.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the Benadryl and stuff products.
And when you're talking about those kind of drugs, they are so immediately addictive. You try it once and you may not be able to stop yourself.
And they also can be terribly damaging. There's lots of evidence of brain damage and other things in long-term users of these drugs.
Well, this has been really
quite
uplifting, hasn't it? This has been really nice.
Let's talk about the book.
Let's talk about something a little more positive.
Let's talk about the book because it is coming out in just a couple of weeks. Flesh and Blood. Of course, I'm about halfway through it, and it is fantastic. And it really is a true departure for you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, I tried this big family saga and tried to do this multi-generational story. Still bring what I know, you know, the hospital background, and bring people in crisis and a hospital in crisis and tell their story and how it's interwoven. And so I'm really excited that I finally get to share it with.
Well, and this idea of history of institutions and how they play a role in a community and families and all these other things. I mean, it's fascinating because it makes you look at the hospitals that we have in our city, some of the big ones, and imagine their history and their growth, and it's quite fascinating.
I mean, and when you think about it, the hospital is one of the, you know, is the cornerstone of a community. When they're started, you know, these little towns.
If you don't have one, you're not getting very big.
No, exactly. And so a lot of them have interesting and fascinating history. And there's always, you know, I've been in hospitals for the last 20 years, and there's always tons of hospital, you know, like office politics. There's hospital politics, and it's kind of fun to take people behind the scenes of that. And
well, and you would hear all those little sort of ghost stories and those little rumors about the building and about the families and about all these things too.
So yeah, it was really fun. Like the Mayo Clinic's a great example. It was started literally by the Mayo family, a father and two sons in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. They built the city of Rochester because of the Mayo Clinic. And sort of that was one of my models to use to kind of fictionalize.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Dan. Flesh and Blood, the book that we're talking about, will be coming out on April 13th. You will definitely want to get your hands on it.
Remember, kids, party safely tonight if you are celebrating St. Patrick's Day.
Don't wake up in a diaper is the moral of this story, okay?
Don't wake up in a diaper unless it's your own choice. That's the key. We're going to take a break. When we come back, and Lindsay will be joining us.
Tell us?
I think probably one of the foremost cookbook authors in our country. Always a pleasure to see her, and she's got a new book out that is huge. 500 recipes. We'll talk about it right after this. Stick around.